We're on. No, we're on. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lower Paxton Township Historical Commission meeting for May. And we just want to wish everybody a happy May Day today. And just in case you were wondering, today in history, in 1931, the Empire State Building was dedicated by the President Herbert Hoover. And oddly enough, the building was in New York City, and he lit the lights of the Empire State Building from the White House. How did he do that? You can see me later. In 1852, the adventurer and performer Calamity Jane was born. And in 1967, the tissue boxes were running out of the stores because Elvis Presley got married to Priscilla in 1967. So the women cried. So, and Bill Minsker, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
My pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tonight's presentation is President Eisenhower's Ancestral Roots in Lower Paxton Township, presented by our own Bob Thomas. Bob, thank you for your presentation this evening.
Hello, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. Tonight's presentation, as you see on the title, we're going to discuss President Eisenhower's ancestral roots in Lower Paxton Township in Dauphin County. So what we're going to discuss tonight all occurred before President Eisenhower was even born. So we're going way back. Just as an introduction, we always think that President Eisenhower, we think about Kansas, but his family roots actually trace back to his immigrant grandparents settling in, I say, the frontier of Pennsylvania in the mid-1700s. This was a frontier out here. We weren't even a state, we weren't a country, we were a province of the British throne. So that's how far back we're going. There were several generations of the president's ancestors that lived in Dauphin County until 1879, when the family moved west to Kansas. So tonight we'll trace the Eisenhower family as it settles in the 1740s Lancaster County, which back then comprised Lancaster, Dauphin, and Lebanon counties. That was all Lancaster County. So we're going to follow them as they spread out into Lower Paxton Township and northern Dauphin County. Just a few local connections to get your interest piqued. We know of two farms in Lower Paxton Township that were owned by President Eisenhower's great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather. We can identify the subdivisions built in these farms, so you might be living on sacred land. The Eisenhower descendants, not any of the president's direct ancestors, are buried in cemeteries in our township, and I'll explain that later. And the president's father, David Eisenhower, was actually born in Elizabethville, northern Dauphin County. So we missed Ike by one generation. Had they not moved, might be a different story. This is his family tree, and the folks we're going to be talking about are Peter Eisenhower, his great-great-grandfather, Frederick, his great-grandfather, and Jacob, his grandfather. Those are the three main people that have a role in our story tonight. All right, let's start at the very beginning. The Eisenhower family immigrates to the New World. It wasn't the United States, it wasn't America, it was the New World. In 1741, this is Ike's three times great-grandparents, Hans Nicholas Eisenhower and Anna Margreta Struble, maiden name Eisenhower. So these are Ike's three times great-grandparents. Just for full disclosure, they're also my seven times great-grandparents. So I'll weave that in tonight. They brought with them three sons, Peter, who was 25 then. This is President Eisenhower's great-great-grandfather. Johannes, who was younger. That's who I descend from. Martin was younger as well. And they brought one daughter, Maria Magdalena, with them. Their homeland was known as Palatine, which was an area along the Rhine River in what would become part of southern Germany. And from what I can tell, I think they were probably fleeing religious persecution and oppression. They were part of the Lutheran faith. So let's make this voyage across the ocean. 1741, they sailed out of Rotterdam, the Netherlands. I say around mid-August 1741. It was a 3-month trip. Can you imagine being on a sailing ship for 3 months? They sailed aboard the ship Europa, which one of our guests tonight actually brought me a copy of the Europa, an old sailing ship. So I've never seen that before, so thank you, Debbie. The sad part is the Europa makes this 3-month journey and runs aground in Lewis, Delaware. Because can you imagine 3 months on a boat, you get to where you're going, and your ship runs aground. Thankfully, they get all the passengers off. The captain, I'm not sure. He may have gone down with his ship. The family then is processed through Philadelphia on November 17th of 1741. They settle in Bethel Township out near Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania. Lebanon County today was Lancaster County back then. This is an old map of Bethel Township, Fredericksburg. See if my pointer's working here. This here is the town of Fredericksburg right here. And up here is a tract of land owned by somebody called Nicholas Ironcutter Eisenhower. Eisenhower translated literally means iron hewer. Eisen means iron, Hauer means hewer. So blacksmiths basically is what the name means. So Hans Nicholas buys this farm just northwest of Fredericksburg. The funny thing is, I think you've all probably been there and didn't know it, because my unprofessional surveying skills puts that farm somewhere right near where Interstate 78 proceeds north of Fredericksburg. So if you're going out 78 toward Allentown, in my opinion, I think you're cutting across part of the original Eisenhower homestead. You don't even know it. So let's talk about the family. I mentioned Peter, his great-great-grandfather. He's the one who eventually buys land in Lower Paxton Township in 1779. He had 17 children with 3 wives. Wow. Okay, get the numbers right here. That's my 6th-time great-grandfather, Johannes. I know his ancestors settled up in the Halifax, Fisherville area. That's where my ancestors were at. And he's got 19 children with 2 wives. Whoa. Martin is the 3rd son. He supposedly dies fighting Indians. And again, this is the frontier. You know, we're still having fights with Indians here. And he supposedly dies fighting with Indians. He had 4 children. And Maria marries a Michael Fisher. They have at least 1 child, but from what I can find out, she moves to North Carolina. So I think if you add it all up, there's 41 kids out of this first generation Eisenhower family, the ones that came over. There's 41 kids right away. So the family tree is huge. Let's start with Peter Eisenhower. This is Ike's great-great-grandfather. He was a successful blacksmith, landowner, and merchant in the Fredericksburg area. Like I said, he was married 3 times with 17 children. He was producing well into his 70s. He actually had a son, Peter Jr., to his first wife, who was a Paxton Ranger in the 1770s. His second wife, Maria Schmidt, he had 1 son, John, who we have a local connection with because John's buried in Wenrick Cemetery, St. Thomas Church in Linglestown. His third wife, he has 8 children. The very last child born is Frederick. That's President Eisenhower's great-grandfather. Now, Peter starts to sell off his land out in Fredericksburg in the 1777s. By 1779, he sells the family homestead that we saw on the map. And a month or two later, he buys 170 acres in Lower Paxton Township, north of Linglestown Road, at the base of Blue Mountain. Basically, northeast of what used to be the Blue Ridge Country Club. You'll see the name gets butchered through various documents, but this piece is actually coming from this, if y'all want to turn around and look quick, this very large book that I have, which is the Eisenhower Lineage and Reference. And it details how on July 27th, 1779, he buys, I think it's 170 acres, from Abraham Latchaw. Now, if you've been around here as long as I have, Latchaw means something. Because this land is less than a mile away from where the old Latchaw lumber yard used to be, where the Giant is on Linglestown Road now. So Earl Latchaw. So I haven't studied the Latchaw genealogy, but I got to believe there's some connection going on here. So anyway, this is how it's written up in this large book. I had Denise do her normal property deed research, and she's verified that it's all true. You know, Peter buys it in 1779. He eventually sells the farm to his son John in 1795. And then John eventually sells the farm to his son-in-law, John Unger, who marries John's daughter, Catherine, in 1840. So this farm that Peter bought stays in the family for quite a while. We have some old land maps that Denise digs up for us, and these are the 2 tracts that Peter Eisenhower bought. What's interesting, just looking at this one, they're all numbered, these old maps, they number the lots. But you see this is 9, and then there's an A over there. On these old maps, there's footnotes on the side, so you go to footnote 9A, and it tells you that this land was previously owned by Peter Eisenhower. And so it just documents, again, the ownership line that Peter had. This is a 1799 survey map, and again, it shows Peter Eisenhower, and he actually bought some land in a partnership with a Peter Felty, and then the farm that he owned just south of that plot. So today, this land is the Forest Hills subdivision. So if you live up in Forest Hills, you very well probably live on President Eisenhower's great-great-grandfather's farm. This is an 1875 map, and it shows that the property that we're talking about, you can see the dot there with a J. Unger. Again, that was Peter's great-great-grandson. So even in 1775, it's still owned kind of in the family. This is a 1948 aerial photo I found, and you can see it's all farmland. What I have circled is where the house was. You can see Blue Ridge Country Club's down here at the very bottom left corner. Sportsman's Golf Course isn't even there yet. So we think the house is right about there, right near the intersection of Forest Hill Drive and Toft Tree Drive is about where the farmhouse stood before it was developed. This was a newspaper article I have in my collection. 1952 in the Patriot News was done by Dottie Smith Lebo. And she chronicles, as you can see it's titled, Ike's Ancestor Founded Home Near Linglestown. She chronicles the Peter Eisenhower land and ownership. and she provides some pictures. The one on the left side is the original house. The one on the right, well, we'll talk about that. The picture is Catherine Eisenhower, John Eisenhower's wife. So in this article, they provide you saw the picture of what was the original homestead, and she identifies it as, Peter Eisenhower built this home in the middle 1700s. With a modern technology called a cell phone, we're actually able to zoom in. And there's actually 4 people sitting in front of this house. Wouldn't you love to know who they are, or when this picture was even taken? But that was the Peter Eisenhower homestead. The author of the article says that a home was built and incorporated some of the original house. It's a stretch for me, because to go from the log cabin split level to this is a little bit of a drastic change. But this house set on that property. I also know that from what I've researched, John Eisenhower built a second house on his property. That might be this. But anyway, it was owned by a Colonel Mallon back when she did the article in 1950s. So let's go to the next generation, Frederick. I mentioned Frederick was the youngest son of Peter. Old Peter had so many children, he actually had 2 sons he named Frederick. He had a son he named Frederick with his first wife, and I guess he forgot. Years later, they already had one, and names the last one Frederick. So Frederick, 1817, he marries a Barbara Miller, daughter of John Miller, who is a property farm owner in the Nyes Road Union Deposit area. I think most of you know where that is. So you can kind of see where this is headed. In 1820, John Miller deeds 53 acres to Frederick and Barbara. We're not totally sure where this tract is. We think it's on the west side of Nyes Creek, Nyes Run, is where we think this land was, because it included part of a Miller tract and part of a Jacob Smith tract. So Barbara and Frederick, they appear in the 1820 and 1830 census as living in Lower Paxton Township. In 1833, Frederick purchased the rest of the John Miller estate, which is 149 acres. Actually, what I've read is he's the highest bidder at a public auction. So in 1840, he and Barbara are living in Upper Paxton Township. Now we start to see the Elizabethville influence here. So at that point in time, they're not living down here, they're living up there, but they still own the land. In 1853, he sells the Miller farm, 149 acres, to his daughter, Polly, and her husband, Benjamin Miller. Now, Polly, I'm going to get to this later, is buried in the Fackler Cemetery. And Polly and Benjamin build the very nice brick house that our own Pam lives in, out on Union Deposit Road there. So the very stately brick home is Polly and Benjamin Miller's home. So he sells his farm in Elizabethville to a son-in-law, and by 1860, Frederick, at the age of 66, he's living with his son Jacob in Elizabethville. Again, had Denise do some record research here, verify everything, and we can, verify the sale from Miller to Frederick, the 53 acres first. One of the interesting things in there is that sale also included a water right of the mill race. See, there was a grist mill on Nyes Run, just right south of the bridge when you cross over Nyes Run on Union Deposit Road. There was a grist mill there. And that sale actually included the privilege of digging clay on the hillside to mend the race and dam for the grist mill. They were funneling the water down to make sure there's enough water to run the grist mill. And it's just something you don't even think about today. Rights to dig up clay, you kidding me? But back then it meant something. He then buys in 1833, like I said, he buys the rest of the John Miller estate, 149 acres at a public sale, pays $2,248.15. Wow. And then the property eventually, 1853, goes to Benjamin and Polly Miller. So all the research points that we have are facts correct. Again, this is an old land map. It shows it as Shaw going to John Miller. And this was a map Pam provided. Map of the old John Miller property, 1797. And you can see Nye Run, or Nye's Creek, whatever you want to call it, is right here. So his property extended on the west side of Nye's Run. And even included kind of a strange bump out here. Is that 49 on the map? So that's the John Miller property. This is a 1940s aerial view of the farm on Union Deposit Road, and you can see it's all farmland, but Pam's house is there. Pam, your house is right there. So today, that land is inhabited by people living in the development known as King's Crossing. So if you live in King's Crossing subdivision, you're living on Frederick Eisenhower's farmland. The Hershey News, boy, I haven't seen that newspaper in a while, but in 1953, Ike is president then, and he comes to Hershey. And you can see 50,000 people, they fill the stadium and everything. And this article, touches a little bit on Ike's, family ancestors from the area. And buried in this article, it says that the farmhouse where the Eisenhowers lived stood on a slight slope across a brook from present Highway Route 340, that's Union Deposit Road, about 4 miles east of Harrisburg and immediately north of Rutherford Heights. So if we're trying to figure out where Frederick and Barbara's house was, this is as good as I can get as far as... So I tried to interpret this. Across a brook from the present highway. So I think it means it's house, brook, and highway is how I'm interpreting this. The brook is running between the house and Union Deposit Road. Well, the red lines I've put on there is where Union Deposit Road is. The only place I can find a brook with a gently sloping hill is in the area of where Cider Press Road is, off Union Deposit Road, is where this map is pointing me to, because the description, there's no other brooks on the property except that little brook that runs down and joins Nye's Run. So I have a feeling their house was somewhere near Cider Press Road, somewhere in that general area. So let's go to Ike's grandfather. This is Jacob, and he's the son of Frederick. I've seen both ways. I've seen him born in Elizabethville, and I've seen him born in Lower Paxton Township, so I'm not totally sure where Jacob is born. But anyway, he marries a Rebecca Matter in 1847. He continues the family tradition of having a large family with 14 children, all born in Elizabethville. And in the 1850 census, Jacob is shown as the head of household, but they're living in Lower Paxton Township at his father Frederick's farm. So now we have Jacob not owning the land, but inhabiting the land down here. His father's already up in Elizabethville. In 1854, Jacob builds a brand new brick stately home in Elizabethville. Beautiful. I mean, it's still a mansion. It had to be a mansion when it was built. And David Eisenhower, Ike's father, is actually born in this house in 1863. Just a little footnote. David was the only son of Jacob to have a son to carry out the family name. So this is the house. on West Main Street in Elizabethville. It's still there. In fact, it was up for sale. I saw it for sale within the last 5 years. It was on the market and sold. But I guess if you have 14 kids, you need a big house. So it's a big, stately house. And what I've read is that it was used as a meeting place for religious purposes. The River Brethren would meet there. And out along Route 209, there's actually a stone with a marker that's indicating this house was built by the grandfather of President Eisenhower, Jacob Eisenhower, and that they moved to Kansas in the summer. This says 1878. So at least that building is memorialized with a marker. So the family moves west. In 1853, Jacob, this is Ike's grandfather, becomes a pastor in the River Brethren Church in Elizabethville. In 1878, he packs the family up, including old Frederick, who's well up in his 80s by then, and they move to Abilene, Kansas, supposedly in a 15-car train organized by the River Brethren congregation, and presumably went west for better farming opportunities, cheap land, and also spread the faith. The land was a lot cheaper out there than it was here. And so Ike's great-grandfather, Frederick, actually dies in 1884 in Kansas at the age of 89. I'm hoping I've inherited some of these long life genes. I'm not sure. Anyway, locally, we do have some grave markers, and it's been published. This was a Patriot News article back in, I think, the early 90s. And what we have is John and Catherine Eisenhower. John's the son of Peter. Him and his wife, Catherine, are buried in the Wenrick Cemetery at St. Thomas United Church of Christ. We have a picture of old John. Some people say I kind of resemble him, but I'm not sure. I'm hoping not. That's his wife, Catherine. She's buried right beside him in Wenrick Cemetery. Polly Eisenhower Miller, who I talked about earlier, she's actually buried in a small cemetery that today, and of all places, is in the middle of a neighborhood. The Fackler Cemetery, as it's known, sits... I don't know the name of the neighborhood, but it's right off Red Top Road. Is that Hunt Club there? And it's right on, I can read, Withers Court. So there's a small lot there, is where the Fackler Cemetery is, of all places. And in that cemetery is buried Polly Miller. And as it says, she is the daughter of F and B, Frederick and Barbara Eisenhower. So she's buried in the middle of a neighborhood right now. And then we also have some related graves, the Church of God Cemetery. This is the old cemetery at the west end of town, at the west roundabout, across from the old fire hall. And buried in there is Catherine Eisenhower, who married David Unger. Remember, they took over the Peter Eisenhower farm. So Catherine is the daughter of John and Catherine Eisenhower. So those two are buried, and you can, again, it says she's the daughter of John and Catherine Eisenhower. So those are the only grave markers that I know of locally with Eisenhowers. Let me just give you a little bit of information on my reference. There's a book out there called The Eisenhowers in Pennsylvania, by a Martin Brackbill. Used information from that book. Denise provided me with land records, Pam some old maps, Sarah helped with some research on a book. This specific book, this big green book that I have here, I asked Sarah to do a little research on this book, and technically it doesn't exist. And I'm like, well, it exists because it's heavy. But what Sarah tells me, it's what they, in archival circles, refer to as a manuscript. It is a hand-typed, book put together by Fannie B. Taylor Richardson. She was out in Indiana in 1956. So it wasn't a commercially sold book, so it's even rarer than I realized it was, Sarah. So you're probably wondering, well, how does he have it? Well, I mentioned my 5-time great-grandfather, or 6-time, was Johannes. He had a son, Benjamin, my 5-time great-grandfather. He's buried on the Hill Cemetery above Halifax. It's the only red stone in the cemetery, and it's all in German. I do have the translation at home, but skip a couple generations. Benjamin had a grandson, Valentine E. Eisenhower. That's my 3 times great-grandfather. He lived in the Fisherville area, just out between Halifax and Elizabethville. Well, Valentine had a daughter, Margaret. They called her Maggie. She was my great-great-grandmother. That's her in the middle there, holding her great-granddaughter, my mother. And my grandmother's on the right, my great-grandmother's on the left. It was through my great-grandmother, Edna Warfel. She gave me this book. I mean, decades ago, and I really thought it was neat, but only as I got older did I realize how neat it was and how rare it is now. So that's how I come to have this voluminous book. So just to try to wrap it up here, we have 3 generations of President Eisenhower's ancestors living in our township, and 2 of them were landowners. Peter and Frederick, we know, owned land here. His great-grandfather, Frederick, was born in LP Township. Peter, his great-great-grandfather, supposedly died in LP Township. We're just not sure where he's buried. Back then it might have been on the farm, but I've not been able to find a burial site for him. So the family name is literally etched in granite locally, and I think it makes for some great local history. So at that point, I just want to thank Denise and Sarah and Pam for helping me out, and thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, I've already met one distant cousin tonight, Debbie Newell, up here in the front. We're trying to figure out what connections we have, but she has Eisenhower ancestry in her family tree as well. So, and this was just a summary slide, just trying to give you the whole rundown from the beginning all the way up to Dwight Eisenhower, who was actually born in Texas. I didn't realize that. He was actually born in Texas, but the family moved back to Kansas in 1892. So anyway, that's the ancestral history of the Eisenhowers in Lower Paxton Township and Dauphin County. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to try to make up an answer. Thank you.
Any questions for Bob? I just have one question. I had heard long ago, Bob, that Ike was born in Texas. Is there any reason why they were in Texas? For his
Probably a reason, but I don't know what it was.
I can address that.
Yes.
They were in Kansas, and they fell along hard times, and they moved to Texas to get work. And once they got money back, they moved back to Kansas.
Interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Interesting.
So they moved to Texas for work.
Very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Solved that. Any other questions from anybody? Well, thank you for your attention. Yes, Bill.
A bunch of Warfels in Dauphin. Are you related to any of those Warfels? I mean, that's not that common of a name.
Probably. Probably. Yeah, I have a lot of Warfel relatives up in Dauphin, Halifax, Fisherville area. Yeah. So, Christy.
Yeah, it's interesting that Bill just said that because I happen to remember the one of the old directors of archaeology at the State Museum was a Stephen Warfel.
There's a Holly Warfel.
possibility.
Person, parents were teachers, daughters of teachers, like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Warfels around. I used to go to a Warfel reunion. I didn't even know how I fit in. But yeah, that's me. Yep.
The one question I have, I can talk pretty loud. The one question I have is, again, that Fackler Cemetery, we've talked about it a bunch of times, and I was talking to Mr. Zugay the other day about something else downtown. How in the world, and he doesn't, he said it's a very good question, how can you sell off a cemetery to a private landowner? I think laws were broken. It should, huh? So then that land should go back as a cemetery. So how you know, I think all of us are conservators of every cemetery everywhere so people can rest in peace.
Okay.
Like the New Side Cemetery we're working on.
Don't bring that.
So there you go.
Can I address that?
Absolutely.
Okay, number one, as Eric said, you can't privately own a cemetery, no. The issue with this particular cemetery, as far as we know, and I've done research on that cemetery myself, when that land was owned back whenever, it's now in a development, and there are 2 lots. That cemetery sits at the back corner of one of the lots. So when the person originally bought that lot, that cemetery was part of that lot, and it was somehow included in the sale.
And the laws have changed too since.
And that's true, Denise, thank you. The laws have changed a lot since then, too.
I think people should know, and they should try to uninclude it. I mean, at least they should
Well,
have a fence around it.
It depends on who owns the property, number one. Number two, I don't know what it would take legally to undo that at this point. I would love to get back there and see it, but we can't just walk onto the property to look because of where it is. We need to contact what actually the lot it's on used to be owned and may still be owned by, I think it was your mom's doctor, by Denise's, her mother's old doctor.
Paul Williams, he passed away.
Yes. But as far as we know, I think the latest deed that I found, the Williams still owned it. The wife owns it, but she doesn't live there. We think she rents it out. So it's, trying to track down things.
Are there laws for maintenance of those? Don't they have to be maintained, and then they would have to be compelled by somebody, by a judge, to allow you access, say, once a month?
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I think
Yeah.
I don't think there is. I'm not, I'm aware of. I have a couple of things at home concerning most recent things. I'll have to look and see what I can find out.
My dad died in 1956 when I was 4 years old, and he's buried at Prospect Hill, which is at the end of Market Street, that horrible house over it. And most recently, and when he died at 25, they didn't have plots, and so my dad's brother, and my maiden name was Waltz, W-A-L-T-Z, and my dad's brother gave him 4 plots. How he had 4, I don't know. So my dad's there. My uncle gave him 4 plots, hoping my mother would be next to him, and my husband and I would be next to them. So recently, I've reconnected with my cousin, who's an only child as well, and she said, I need to give you the deed to these cemetery plots. And I said, well, I think I already have it. And she said, no, you don't, I do. All these years I've been thinking I have 3 plots to use, which I don't. So I had to go so the funeral, it's a mess. And I guess it's organized, but I don't like it. But I had to go to Woodlawn down here on Londonderry Road because I don't know if they own it, but they oversee a lot of cemeteries. And she said, oh, yeah, we need to get this right. And I said, yeah, I would appreciate that. But I said, is there anything you can do with this cemetery? When I go there to clean off my grandparents' graves and my dad's graves and whatever, it's a mess. It's not maintained. The driveways in are a muddy mess. It's terrible. And then my Eisenhowers are buried in East Park, East Harrisburg Cemetery there. And it's a mess. Trees have fallen over. They don't maintain them. So she said to me, we can't do anything with these old cemeteries. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, they're called historical sites now. And we can't go in. And I said, the person who owns this house that you drive through to go into Prospect Hill? And she said, oh, he doesn't live there anymore. He lives in Switzerland, and he doesn't care about it. And I said, it has a tarp on it. Can't somebody take it down? I said, this is awful. This isn't right for all the people that are buried there, or anybody's progenitors that are buried there. And she said, it's a historical site. We can't even go in there. We'd like to go in and trim bushes or add trees. And I said, they don't need trees. You just need to clean up the roads. But she said they're historical sites and we can't touch them. So when I get a foot back, I'm going to make an appointment and see if I can talk to the mayor and say, this isn't right. Those of us that have old plots to be buried in, the cemeteries are terrible.
I reached out to the mayor's office about that. I have family
Oh,
there.
good.
They should be compelled to at least clean up that hedge. There was a little man, I worked with John Harris for 40 years. There was a little man that would go up and down there, and I always wonder if he'd have a plot there. He was all bent over. He cleaned up everything. He did the best he could, and as he aged, it just got less and less. Just a life lesson for me. But to drive in there, and that thing was renowned. There was a toll gate.
Yeah.
It's hit. People were speeding. There's a lot of factors as to why it gets hit. They put up bollards. They blew those over because people were really flying up there. So
She said he lives in Switzerland and he doesn't care. He doesn't care that it sits there in the condition that it's in. He doesn't want to spend the money to take it down.
he has money to tear things down. I mean, they've torn down a lot of structures.
Well, and if they would contact families, maybe they'd go and try to help. Just to
These are
get it
these are
down.
going to be ongoing issues that we can't solve this evening, but it's something that we need to always consider and keep in mind when we consider some of these cemeteries as some of these individuals who are basically the foundation of our township and families here. So,
All right, well, thank you all for coming, appreciate it.
thank you very, very much. So, one cute story that there's several here may already heard this, but I went down to Gettysburg to hear a history of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and the one gentleman got up and said that he was at one of the theaters there, and he went to go see the film The Longest Day. And he said, how when you go into a theater, he said, when you're watching a movie, all of a sudden somebody breaks into the back door and the light comes out it lights up the screen, and it just bothers people because it's interrupting the movie. He says, so I turned around and looked to see who it was that came in the middle of a film. It was Ike Eisenhower, who was living in Gettysburg, had walked in and stood against the back wall and just watched the rest of the movie about D-Day. So it's very, very interesting. So, yes, Bill.
Where I keep seeing at many presentations all these old maps that show all the old farm parcels.
You can get on the Pennsylvania Museum Commission, and you'll pull up all those maps. In fact, what's really great about those maps is you're able to actually you can zoom in and see every bit of detail that you could ask for. But it's the Pennsylvania Museum Commission website. You could probably. I don't know if they're available for purchase, but if they were, they would be. It would cost you a pretty penny. But you can get it right on the website and pull up those maps and probably hit print screen, I guess, and probably access those. What's that? You can snip it. So pretty very cool. Okay. So, okay, at this time, are there any committee member comments?
Yes, if I could address a little bit about Newside Cemetery here.
Okay.
5 minutes. On May 14th, 10:30 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, we're going to have a cleanup session in and around Newside Cemetery. You'll be hearing more about it in the future and what we plan to do. But one of the things we're going to be looking at is sort of the mystery of Newside Cemetery, because the township has a 20 by 20 foot plot there, cemetery. And the DAR, there's a memorial in there and a couple of ornate headstones. But we have 19 headstones in that 20 by 20 area. The thing is, we know that around 130 people were buried at Newside. So there's going to be a mystery. There's a mystery to that. But one of the things we want to do is make it presentable, because we have got, I think it's well over a dozen occupants of the cemetery who are veterans of the Revolutionary War, the French and Indian War, and the War of 1812, veterans and people who helped found Lower Paxton Township, pioneers. And we want to try to locate where those people are and have it properly cared for. And we do have the cooperation of the Four Seasons Homeowners Association on this. But May 14th, 10:30 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, come on over, bring a rake, bring some of your leaf bags, and we're going to go in and clean that place up and make it look respectable for the people that are in there. Thank you.
Jay, one question. I realize that the accessibility of the cemetery is not easy, so where would somebody park?
We will, yes, there will be parking in closer to a little bit to the west by the red barn that's there at Four Seasons. At that red barn and up inside the development, there will be
Okay.
there will be parking. And the other person who's the co-chair in this committee is Dave Doyle, who couldn't be here tonight. And we're going to have all that worked out in time. And also on the 14th, we're going to have a sort of a guest cleaner-upper helper there, Dave Beiser, who goes by the name John Harris, does the French and Indian War. He's going to be there to give us a boost that day.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? You had one?
I'm working on a project. Our next non-program meeting will be July. Is that correct?
That's correct.
With our township book that was published for the bicentennial in 1967. I'm putting together some information to do something with this for the national 250th next year. And I'd like to present that material to the committee to see if you're interested. So
that'd be great.
for our July meeting on the agenda, I'd like to do that.
Add that. Thank you. We'll make sure that's added. Any other member comments? Any public comment at this time? Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Bob for his presentation this evening. Bob does always a great job in doing research and presentation, and I've always said that Bob Thomas is the voice of our historical commission. He speaks so well. Next month on June 5th, in fact, she's even here this evening. Marjorie Martin and her cohort in crime, Marlene Steele, will be doing a presentation on the church on the corner. It's about Charlton Church and its history here in our township. And it's rich, it's deep, and it goes back quite a ways, I understand. So that'll be on June 5th here at the Lower Paxton Municipal Center at 6:30. So just want to make sure we have that announcement out. Just really quickly, Dave Doyle was in and out of the hospital. He's doing fine. He had an infection. He needed to have some surgeries to remove that infection. He's doing great, and so hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us in June. So we're hoping we can have him back. So our thoughts and prayers are with him as he watches this evening. So anything else for the good of the order? Otherwise, I'll ask for an adjournment. Okay. Motion made, seconded. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.